quickly, and I'm hoping that we'll have time for some questions, and we're not going to pass the mic or anything like that, but if we get to a part of like questions, I'll just have you ask the question, and then I'll repeat the question for all of us, and so hopefully we can get those answered. And if I don't know the answer, then I'll make it up. And no, this is what I want to do today. Is we've been wanting to have these kind of congregational-wide meetings, kind of gatherings in which we can talk about specific things about our church, around our vision and mission, and then also as we're preparing for General Conference. And the only reason I'm sitting up here instead of like being down on the floor is because it's being videotaped, and I look better in the light up here than I do on the floor down there. So I'm going to talk pretty fast because I have a lot that I want to make sure we cover. We have some slides. If you came in, there is a copy of our current budget in the back, right in front of the baptismal font. You can grab that now or afterwards. On the back is our December financial minutes, if you will. We'll talk through a little bit of this kind of big picture stuff, but and just so you know too, like moving forward, Karen unfortunately couldn't be here. She has a family baby shower, but Aaron's here somewhere. Aaron in the back. If you have particular questions on the budget, you can talk to Aaron. And if you've ever wanted to know, like get a monthly financial report, we'd be happy to add you to our distribution list. And Aaron and Karen send out a monthly report where you can see basically what you see here is what you would get in the monthly report. And actually, Aaron, I just realized looking at this, I forgot to grab the actual budget. It's on my desk. Will you go grab that for me? Thank you. So I want to acknowledge a couple of people in the room. Several of our leadership board members are here. So if you serve on our leadership board, would you stand so that we can throw tomatoes at you? And yay! So part of being on the leadership board is to deal with things like budgets and ministry plans and all those things. And so if you have questions, I would encourage you to reach out to them. Gabe is currently serving as our chair of our leadership board. Kent Stevens served as our chair the last couple of years. And so they would be happy to answer questions, or any of our board members. We also have several staff here. So if you're on staff, will you stand so we can, if you don't know these, our staff members, a couple of our staff. Erin is here. She's just, yes. So we're calling this an all-in church gathering because if you remember, 2023, we kicked off a 2-year ministry theme, kind of what the whole life of the church was going to be. And it revolves around this, what we hear in the Gospels of Jesus saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so we've kind of organized the whole life of the church around these kind of 5 areas, and that when they come together, if you notice in this image, when they come together, that little kind of deep purple, almost looks like a rocket, is a symbol of the Trinity, a Celtic Trinity. So when it comes together, we get to really embody the fullness of who God has called us to be. And so I wanted to highlight some of the joys and celebrations from 2023, things that we accomplished together, as well as kind of lay out and highlight where we feel like where God's calling us to go in 2024. We'll talk about some budget things, and then we'll get into denomination specific things. So Anthony, if you can go to the next slide. I apologize, thank you, that this is a little hard to see. I'm not always good about recognizing when it looks one way on your computer compared to on the screen. But I want to highlight a couple of things. This is big picture, just celebrating what God has done in our church in this last year. If you have been a part of Cider Ridge for a while, you know that we've had this long time ministry called Mom's Day Out. It is not a daycare, it kind of functions like a daycare. Kids come 1 day a week. We have 3 different days that they gather, but they come 1 day a week from 9:30 to 1 o'clock. It's been a foundational ministry here at the church. one of the things that we've discovered over the last several years is that name, Mom's Day Out, no longer really fits the demographics of people who are a part of that ministry because families are changing. We have a lot of single dads. We have a lot of dads who bring their children, or a dad who may work from home. We have same-sex parents. And so we spent some time rethinking that name, and so we've renamed Mom's Day Out to My Day Out. So it is... depending on how you look at it, could be the kid's day out from parent's house, or the parent gets a day out. And so we've renamed that, and that continues to grow. That unfortunately we had to shut down in the middle of the pandemic. And that has been great over the last year to see the resurgence of our My Day Out program, as well as that has increasingly been a great avenue for us to connect to our neighbors. And many of them have started attending some additional events that we've had throughout the year, and many of them have started attending our church as well. So we're very proud of that. Our Vacation Bible School continues to be a main staple here at our church. This last summer, we had over 300 kids. We had 145 people volunteer to participate in our Vacation Bible School. Our 5th and 6th grade, it's like an all-day camp for them. They raised over $7,000, which was matched by Kemba for the Hilliard Food Pantry, which was just amazing to see those kids excited for what they were able to accomplish. This year, we hosted for the first time, or in 2023, a winter ball, which was fun. We just, our family ministries team had another gathering for families as well just last weekend. Our Treats and Treasures, our Easter's extravaganza, Parents' Night Out is increasingly popular, and we're seeing more and more of our My Day Out families engage beyond just the My Day Out program. And these are some of the ways in which they're doing it. They come to our winter ball, they come to our Easter events, they come to our Parents' Night Out. And so our family ministries team is doing some marvelous things as they're caring for the families of our church and community. They launched this year Parent Connect Nights, or in 2023, which were informational gatherings around specific topics like social media, those type things, and increasingly having one-on-one conversations with parents. And so Kristen and Aaron and Lori and Charlie have been doing a great job at engaging not only our children and youth, but also their parents as well. This year we sent 50 care packages to college students. This happens a couple of times a year to let them know that they're not forgotten, that we're still praying for them and caring for them. We're seeing new families come to the church, returning families who are coming, and we're broadening our servant population in our children's ministry, which is great. Our middle school youth have doubled in size in this last year. And last year we sent 30 high schoolers to Lakeside. And so we're continuing to live more fully into coming alongside of our families. If you can go to the next slide, Anthony. As we continue to care for souls and minds, this last year we had 150 people participate in our fall Wednesday night classes that are multiple different Bible studies and classes that are happening that revolve around a meal together, and then we break into different groups. So we're seeing more and more people. And what was really great is we saw a diverse population gather for those, especially some new folk who were newer to our church participated in our Wednesday night classes. Our Disciple Bible Study continues to grow as they engage in 32 plus weeks together studying Scripture. We've done church-wide devotionals during like Lent or Advent that we just participated in, which has been phenomenal for us to be able to all be studying something together. Our men's transformation groups have continued to remain very active, and that was really great to see in the pandemic as they were meeting on Zoom, but now are meeting often early in the morning in the cafe to care for each other and support each other, and I know some of you participate in that. Our Grief Share ministry was one of the largest Grief Share gatherings we've had this year, which is both a sadness because you recognize it's because people have lost loved ones, but there's also the power of coming together and supporting one another. And so you might have seen them if you attend the 11 o'clock after service. We'd quickly clean up the cafe, and they'd set up to have a meal together in the cafe and then break off into their studies. And so it's been a great support group for many people in our church and in our greater community. We relaunched Alive in Christ, which is, we renamed it. It used to be 55 and Alive. Now it's Alive in Christ. And so we've seen some great numbers of older adults, seasoned adults, participating in some midweek activities, some trips in between Christmas and New Year. Over 50 people went to the Franklin Park Conservatory and had a great time of looking at Christmas lights and fellowshipping with one another. You can go to the next slide. As we continue to care for our bodies, we have a new ministry, Sit and Get Fit, which is meeting 2 times a week in the prayer room, chapel room. I would encourage you to look at the church calendar if that's something you're interested in. It's a really fun, dynamic group as they're exercising together. We have a cycling group that meets pretty much every Sunday after church, and they go riding together, and in the winter they're hiking together. So if that's something you're interested in, it's been a great group to build relationships. We kicked off our pickleball group, which is growing. They're now meeting 2 nights a week, and so it's been a great way for people to build connection and community, and it's multi-generational, which has been really fun to witness. Our Upward Basketball has 250 people participating in something a little bit newer from last year that we're doing again this year. Is we're writing, Kristen is writing all of the curriculum for our Upward Basketball. So part of our Upward Basketball is at practice, they have a devotion with the coach. And we're writing that so that it's very tailored to us, and it parallels very nicely with what the kids are learning on Sunday mornings. And so we've been able to integrate the content from our Sunday morning children's worship into our Upward Basketball program, which is phenomenal that Kristen has been doing that. We kicked off this year with multiple blood drives. We have another one tomorrow, which Cindy told me the number, and I can't remember what it was, but we have the largest group that's participating in the blood drive tomorrow. But over the last 3 blood drives we've done, we've collected over 89 units of blood, which helps 267 people, which has been great to celebrate. If you can go to the next slide. As we live more fully into our mission, this fall we saw one of the largest groups we've ever sent down to Henderson Mission, which was phenomenal, and we have another team that will be heading down there again in September. We kicked off or lived more fully into South Sudan Sewing Group, the Sewing Queens as they call themselves, that make hygiene kits. In this last year, they made 285 hygiene kits that we've been able to send to women in South Sudan. We've paid off school lunches. That was part of our Vacation Bible School collection that we did, was to help offset if a kid has a lunch or they're in a deficit on their school lunch account. We have taken care of that so that no kid has to just get like a peanut butter cheese sandwich. They can get a full meal. So we're continuing to partner with our schools. We hosted a missions and a ministry fair this year, getting people plugged into the various missions and ministries of the church. We shared with you our Christmas Eve miracle offering was over $26,000. Half of it stayed here, and the other half, $13,000, went to the Hilliard Food Pantry, which we're very excited to continue to support them. We've had greater connections with some of our missions ministries like Little Bottoms Free Store, the Avondale Elementary, the Women's Respite Center, and Star House. We've increased our needs or our connections with Ridgewood Elementary. Just this week, I had a phone conversation with the school counselor trying to find some aid and help for some families in the Ridgewood Elementary school system. So we're able to plug them in and find the help that they needed. We supported a member of the Ridgewood community. We purchased a $500 gift card for her so she could buy Christmas gifts for her children, and that was great to be able to celebrate that with her. Our missions garden continues to be dynamic with over 2,000 pounds typically of food that is produced, and many of you I know continue to support that and will in the coming year. If you can go to the next slide. Our worship continues to be central to who we are. We're seeing an increase in, this should say, ex-evangelicals, people who have come out of the evangelical church or more conservative traditions. We're finding more and more of them finding Cider Ridge to be a safe, hospitable space for them. That's partly why we're doing the sermon series that we're currently in, is to encourage people who have wrestled with some of these questions of their faith to model for them that it's okay to ask these questions together as we're all wrestling. We're seeing new families participating, joining us in worship, which has been wonderful. Our cafe this last year, really, we've emphasized gathering and hospitality, and one of my greatest things I see on a Sunday morning is when I, especially after the 9:30 service, walk out into the lobby and people are just like hanging out, having coffee, having conversation, eating cookies. Today, I was like a fish going the wrong way coming out of the cafe, and there were like 15 kids running into the cafe to grab cookies. I love that because it shows kind of the vibrancy of our congregation. And so Kenyetta and her team have done a phenomenal job and making sure we're always ready with our hospitality on Sunday. We continue to add new ministry servants into our AV and online team, which has been great for us to be able to have consistency on Sunday mornings. Our choir has grown. If you were at our 11 o'clock service today, they took up, I think, almost every seat in the choir loft, which has been great. Our praise band, we're seeing more and more people plug in and connect there. And our average worship is right around 400. It fluctuates. We never know, from week in, week out, who's going to show up on a Sunday. And just pre-COVID, we're about 100 behind where we were pre-COVID. COVID, we were averaging about 500, or pre-COVID, we were averaging about 500. And so we've seen fluctuations of people coming, which has been wonderful, and people who have left. And they've left for a myriad of reasons. Some have moved. During the pandemic and the year kind of following the pandemic, we saw a lot of people moving to be closer with their family. We've seen people change in employment status, get new jobs in other places, and have to move. We've lost people in our church because of theological differences that they may have, and so they've chosen to worship in other congregations. And then there's a demographic of people that pre-COVID were coming pseudo-regularly, but they never really quite got plugged in. They just would attend, and we saw some of those individuals during the pandemic just slowly drift away, and we don't know if that means they're worshiping somewhere else or if they have stopped worshiping altogether. But we are seeing new people at the same time, so it just takes some time for that kind of trajectory to change, which we're beginning to really see and witnessed in 2023. We're seeing more and more people. If you're worshiping with us in person, you're seeing more and more people are coming back in person. Our Christmas Eve attendance, we went back and looked at the last couple years during COVID, and this last Christmas, 91% of we had 1,100, I think, worship with us on Christmas Eve. 91% of that was in person. At the thick of the pandemic, it was somewhere around 60% were in person compared to online. So we've seen more and more people, while we still do have people who join us online, we're seeing more and more people connecting with us, in person. You can go to the next slide. This year we kicked off, launched some new ministries, or relaunched some ministries that kind of were pushed or put on pause during the pandemic. Alive in Christ, as I mentioned, was one of those ministries that we relaunched but renamed as well. We kicked off Beer and Bible, which is ranged from 30 people to 10 people, somewhere in between there every single month, creating space to have some great conversation. Our men's ministry was launched this year, and they've done a fantastic job at having regular gatherings once a month on Saturday mornings, as well as some midweek gatherings. Friday, they went curling here in Columbus, and I unfortunately couldn't go because of COVID, but I heard they had a wonderful time. They're looking at doing some additional things like a men's retreat, getting away for a couple of days, maybe up to Apple Valley And so that's been a fantastic new ministry that's launched. Our health and wellness team, which existed before the pandemic, has now started to meet more regularly and are putting plans together for some great ministries. The blood pressure comes out of that we do typically monthly. The blood drive has come out of that, and there's some things that they're working on for the future. So let's take a look at the financial updates from 2023. So part of this all-in ministry was an all-in kind of giving campaign. We did a bit of a soft launch this summer to really challenge people in their giving, and we saw some great increases in people's financial support. And then we did more of a formalized launch back in November, where you got in the mail a card as you made some commitments. And what's great is we saw a 12% increase overall in committed giving to the church. And we saw 88 people start giving to the church for the first time in 2023, which is phenomenal. It's what we want. It's not just about, it's not about the numbers. It's not about getting money from people. It's about people saying, I trust this place. I want to financially invest in the mission and the ministry of this church. And so we saw 88 people in our church say, this is the place where I'm going to financially invest. If you remember at the beginning of last year, as we were coming out of COVID a little bit more, restructuring some things, we projected that we were going to end 2023 with a $70,000 deficit. And so we needed to continue to be really fiscally responsible. We could absorb that cost. It wasn't something that we wanted to do, but we could absorb it. But because of the generosity and amazingness of you all, we ended this year with a surplus of $41,000. That's phenomenal. Yeah, that's phenomenal. We saw this year, we announced during the summer that kind of kicked off the campaign. We received a very generous donation from a family that really challenged all of us to kind of step up. And so that allowed us to do some important improvements like the parking lot, the roof, new AC units, paint throughout the church. So we've been able to maintain our facility as well as continue to support all those ministries that I just mentioned a minute ago. And then in December, we were pleasantly surprised by some additional very generous gifts that we received in December that we weren't necessarily anticipating. Now, with that said, in 2023, we're going to talk about apportionments here in a minute. Apportionments are dollars that every United Methodist Church is given a formula of money, dollars that we then support the United Methodist Church. Because we were looking at a $70,000 deficit, we reduced our apportionments from 100% to 30%. In 2024, this new year, we've committed 50%. We've put a strategic plan in place to increase our apportionment dollars in support of our denomination as we continue to see some great growth here. But I wanted you to know that part of the ability to carry over surplus was certainly because we made the decision to pay 30% of our apportionments compared to 100. When I first got here, we were paying 0%, and in 3 years, we were able to get to 100% and maintain that up until 2022. So we have a plan in place to continue to support our denomination, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so looking forward, if you can go to the next slide, looking forward to 2024. We have some great things we're excited about. Mexico Mission is heading out with one of our largest teams. They had a meal and paper signing party today after church as they're getting all their paperwork put together. They're exploring some new ministry opportunities in addition to building a house. There's some greater connections that we're looking at with the ministries that are down there, church that's down there. And so we're sending a dynamic team. They're being commissioned in 2 weeks, is that right? 2 weeks, and our worship services will be praying over them and commissioning them. So we're excited not only about this group that's going down, but also the potential new opportunities that'll happen. We're exploring some youth missions opportunities. We shared with you earlier this year. We received a generous donation from a family in our church that wants to scholarship youth in missions work. And so we have some money set aside in a reserved fund to help scholarship some of our youth to go on mission. We're looking at doing some faith and science gatherings where many of you live and operate and work in this world, and sometimes there's a disconnect between faith and science. We want to have some gatherings in which some faithful scientists will come and talk about the beauty and wonder of God's creation. We're hosting another women's conference this year in April, and so Kenyetta and her team are putting that together. Todd is hosting another marriage retreat, and so we did that in 2022 and had some great success, and so we're going to have another marriage retreat in 2024. We received from the West Ohio a grant for a new respite ministry, specifically with families of those who have dementia or Alzheimer's. We're also working with a ministry, Kenyetta and her team's working with a ministry in Florida. They're based in Florida, is that right, Kenyetta? We're meeting with them in a couple of weeks. We've applied for a grant through them as well, but we received a grant through the West Ohio Conference to kind of get this up and running. And in a week or so, a team will go to this gathering. We'll receive that grant, but we're also, our church has been picked as one of the top 4 projects, which is great. And so there's potential for more grant money that we'll find out about next week. So show me the money. We have 24 confirmands enrolled in our confirmation class right now. Confirmation is for younger adults, 6th, 7th grade, as they're learning more about what it means to be a follower of Jesus and to be a United Methodist follower of Jesus. And so we're excited about that group. We're increasing our connections with Scouts. You may not know, we have a very robust Scout ministry here. It is a ministry of our church. They've kind of existed over there, and we've existed over here. And the leadership board has done a lot of work at kind of bridging those two to bring them together. We have some great connections now and are doing some great work. Scout Sunday will be in 2 weeks, I believe, so we'll see more Scouts who will be present here in our worship service. We're hosting a Scout badge. I don't speak Scout, so there's a badge you can get from your local church that is kind of a faith badge, and so one of our church members is hosting that, and so we have some youth and Scouts that will participate in that. You might have seen in our weekly update, we've redesigned our new members class. Instead of being 1 night, it's going to be 3 nights, and it's all going to revolve around food, because where 2 or more Methodists get together, there's always food, and so we're going to have meals together, and our hope with this new model of new members class is to build a greater sense of connection and community. We're continuing to focus on increasing servants in all of our different ministry areas, which is a struggle, I'll be honest with you. When you get a notification from Planning Center, don't assume somebody else is going to click yes. We struggle every week to make sure we're fully staffed and ready to go for Sundays as well as some of our midweek ministry. So we want to emphasize plugging people into ministry. We're going to do some more outdoor things to really get out in our community and allow ourselves to be more visible in our community. One of them is the first Sunday of June. We're going to do an outdoor worship service where both services will be combined. We'll have a meal together and some games and some fun things to do as we invite our neighbors to engage with us. And we're going to relaunch this year a new prayer ministry that we need to have a more robust prayer life in our church. And so we're excited about what God has in store for us in the coming year. So if you can go to the next slide. So our budget to help fund all of these great things that we feel like God's calling us to do. Erin went and got this off my desk. Thank you, Erin. If you didn't get a copy, see Erin. She can give you one. This is the very condensed version, the one-page version of our budget. Each of these headings, like capital mortgage or congregational care communications, have 10 to 15 other line items underneath them, but these are the broad categories that we call them. And so we are, as Aaron and Karen and our finance groups have done some deep dives into giving, we are projecting to raise $1.5 million, $596,000. That's what our goal, hope is for our income. Part of that is fees and fundraisers and others. That some of that is money we receive for like My Day Out, gets put in that category. Vacation Bible School gets put in that category. So it's income, but it's immediately expensed out like at Vacation Bible School. But we're projecting our income to be $1.5 million. As we've taken a look at our budget, as well as identifying some additional projects that we want to focus on, we are projecting our expenses to be $1.578 with a projected surplus of $18,000, which again is always nice to look at a budget and see that we're projecting a surplus over a deficit. Now, there's a lot of variables that happen that we know every year, and we take a lot of that into consideration as we think about people moving in, people moving out, but we think reasonably our projected surplus is to be $18,000. So that allows us to increase some more missional support to a lot of our missional connections, some of them I mentioned earlier. As I said, we are anticipating, or we are planning, we've committed to increase our apportionments to 50%. We want to continue to fund our maintenance reserve fund. So this is a fund that we create for rainy days, for something that is over $10,000 to $15,000 expense. So if an air conditioner goes out, we budget for this all year, but if something happens that we're like, oh, that was just, we did not expect 5 air conditioners to go out. That gives us some money to pull into that doesn't impact the rest of the budget. So part of our funding in our ministry budget is to grow that reserve fund moving forward. And we're going to tackle some additional capital projects, like we have some ongoing roof repairs, increased security around the building. We're looking into how to make our facility even more secure. And so this will allow us to fund the mission and ministry of 2024, as well as to tackle some of these additional projects. And if you ever want to know, put in here that this is one version of this copy. If you ever want to know how much does Cider Ridge spend on toilet paper, Karen can tell you how much, or if you want to know how much we spend on coffee or coffee cups or napkins, all of that is expensed in very detailed spreadsheets. So never hesitate. I mean this. Never hesitate to reach out to Karen or Aaron about the finances of our church. The only thing we do not publicize are individual staff salaries. Todd and I's salaries are public. That's decided at Charge Conference. If you want to know how much you're paying me, Karen will tell you exactly how much you're paying me. Same thing with Todd. The others, the staff, we don't publicize that. Anything else, they can walk you through and show you exactly how much we have spent in the past or how much we are anticipating spending in the future. We want to be as transparent as possible with our finances, which again, if you ever want to get a monthly report, this is what the leadership board gets. Karen goes through this with the leadership board once a month. Leadership board meets the 4th Monday of every month. It is open public meetings. You are always welcome to come to those. They're upstairs in 202, I think. You're always welcome to come. But you can get this emailed to you. Just reach out to Karen. She will add you to the distribution list. So we want to be as transparent with our finances as possible. All right, so now I want to transition us into some denomination-specific things because this is an interesting year for the United Methodist Church. And I jokingly said, I think it was at 11 o'clock, I'm a Methodist nerd. I will own that, so I can nerd out on this a lot. I recognize the vast majority of us could care less about some of these denominational things. But I wanted to share there are some things that could potentially have an impact on us as a local congregation. So as a reminder, the United Methodist Church is a global denomination. So we are what's called a connectional polity, which means every United Methodist Church is connected to each other and then connected to what we call an annual conference. We live in West Ohio Annual Conference, connected to a jurisdiction. We're a part of the North Central jurisdiction, connected to the global United Methodist Church. We are all connected together. And so we have a book called the Book of Discipline that governs every United Methodist Church. Every 4 years, the global gathering of the church gets together in what's called General Conference. Because of the pandemic, It didn't happen these last 4 years. 2016 was the last normal general conference that happened. In 2019, the bishops of our church called a special general conference specifically to deal with differences around human sexuality. That was it. That was the only thing. It was a much shorter agenda, and it was only to deal with differences of human sexuality. So we're operating under a book of discipline that was edited and adapted in 2016. And then because of the pandemic, it kept being postponed. And so in 2024, we will have our 2020 General Conference, because it happens every 4 years. I don't know how the math works, but that's what we're told. This will happen from April 23rd to May 3rd. It is a 10-day long church meeting, so it is very, very long. There are 862 delegates who are elected. So I'm one of those delegates who was elected. I was elected in 2019 thinking I was going to General Conference in 2020. It's like a Supreme Court nomination. I can't get out of it. And so, but I'm one of 862, which makes me feel very honored. People from all over the country. This is the only place where changes to our book of discipline happen. This is where revisions, adaptations, additions are made. And at General Conference, over 1,000 pieces of legislation get channeled through General Conference. Now, that doesn't mean we vote on 1,000 pieces of legislation, because there's about 12 different sub-teams that meet for the first week that process those 1,000 pieces of legislation. And there has to be a voting threshold that they meet before they get brought before the whole body. So I, as one of the delegates, I'm serving on what's called the Faith and Order Legislative Committee. So anything that has to do with some of our doctrinal, some ordination standards, that gets filtered through the committee that I serve on. We'll discuss those, I think it's like 200 pieces of legislation, and wrestle with them, tweak them, and vote on them. And then if it passes our committee, then it'll go before the whole body in the second week. This is a big gathering that happens. I was in a meeting yesterday morning in preparation for this, and so there's a lot of work that's happening. One of the things that's obviously impacted us as a denomination, as United Methodist Church, is what's called disaffiliation. So in 2019, at that special called General Conference, a paragraph in our book of discipline was passed, was called paragraph 2553, that allowed, it created a process for United Methodist churches to leave the United Methodist Church and keep their buildings. Because we are a connectional church, while we pay the mortgage on our building, we don't technically own it. It is held in trust by the West Ohio Annual Conference. And there's historic reasons for that, and it impacts a lot of things. But we don't technically own it. So this paragraph was passed that created a process if a church did not want to stay in the United Methodist Church specifically on differences of human sexuality. It gave them a process to vote and to leave. You only had to vote if you wanted to leave. Everybody was just automatically United Methodist unless you as a church chose to leave. The leadership board of Cider Ridge, in conversations that we've had and other gatherings that we've had, did not feel a need to call a vote because there wasn't enough kind of momentum. You had to get, basically, it had to be a 60% margin for the church to leave. And there wasn't momentum for us to leave the United Methodist Church, so we didn't call for a church vote. But other churches did. And depending upon what you read, like in the New York Times or Washington Post, there's been articles about this process, and you can find blogs and all, and even friends and family members. It might seem like the United Methodist Church is going through this massive divorce, is some of the language that's been used, to split. In reality, now that we're, that paragraph I should have said too, 2553, ended. It had an expiration date of the 31st of December. So now, in 2024, you can't use that process to leave the United Methodist Church. There's other paragraphs that allow you to do it. It's a little bit more complicated. So there's been this narrative that the United Methodist Church is folding, or we're experiencing, tons of church leaving. And it hurts. Any church that leaves hurts. But I wanted to show you some statistics of the churches that left. So if you can go to the next slide, Anthony. So in the process of disaffiliation, a new denomination formed called the GMC, or the Global Methodist Church. They're a more conservative Methodist denomination. After disaffiliation in the U.S., 74% of the United Methodist churches stayed. So 22,000 United Methodist churches across the country stayed United Methodist. Didn't take a vote, or their vote didn't pass. They didn't get the 60% threshold. Only 14% left to go to the Global Methodist Church, which is roughly about 4,200 churches. And 3,500 decided to become independent or non-denominational, or a part of some, pseudo network. So the vast majority, it's like the cup's half full or half empty. It depends on how you look at it. We're about 3/4 full. Most United Methodist churches, like Cider Ridge, are continuing to stay United Methodist. And the churches that left were almost split 50-50 on either becoming a non-denominational church, or some became a part of this new denomination. So there's this kind of narrative that the United Methodist Church is like folding, and it's just not true. Now, it's impactful. In West Ohio, we've been disproportionately impacted compared to other annual conferences, where we've lost 35% of the churches in West Ohio left. And so we're down to about 700 churches in West Ohio. Other conferences saw 5% of their annual conference left. So it's balanced out. We saw more churches leave in what's called the southeastern jurisdiction, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and disproportionately, almost unanimously, they are predominantly white congregations that have left the United Methodist Church. There's also been this narrative that it's been these large churches who have left. I want to show you this next slide, Anthony, if you will. So the churches that left, 63% worship less than 50 on a Sunday. So of the churches that left the United Methodist Church, 63% worship on average less than 50%. Now, if you also look in the column that says before disaffiliation, most United Methodist churches are less than 50 in average worship. We do not have, as United Methodists, a lot of mega churches. Only 1% of the United Methodist churches worship over 1,000. Our average worship attendance right now is somewhere around 400. We're in about the top 6% of United Methodist churches, the Cider Ridge, just based off of, this is just average worship attendance, not membership. So the vast majority, though, of churches that left are small, rural congregations. That's certainly what we saw in West Ohio. That's not to say they're bad people. That's not to say that, they didn't have reasons or whatever, but that's just the reality. Most churches that left to either go to the Global Methodist Church or go to a new independent non-denom were small, rural congregations. Many of them don't have a full-time pastor. And so they may have 20 people who worship with them with a part-time pastor or a quarter-time pastor. Just so you know, Cider Ridge, as I said, we're in the kind of top 6-7% of the United Methodist Church. I think in West Ohio, we're somewhere, and I'd have to look with new numbers, but we're like somewhere in between the 6th or 7th largest United Methodist Church in West Ohio. It's not to brag, it's just to put in perspective who we are in comparison to other United Methodist churches. But the vast majority of churches who left were small, averaging less than 50. There was also kind of this misinformation that delegates outside, or churches outside the United States, which tend to be, like in Africa, tend to be a little more conservative, that they were going to leave as well, because part of this tension was around differences around human sexuality. But in reality, that hasn't panned true as well. So I want to show you this next slide. So globally, 82% of United Methodist churches across the globe, this includes all of the continent of Africa, the Philippines, Europe, stayed United Methodist. 10% left to go to the Global Methodist Church, and 8% left to become independent. So again, the vast majority of United Methodists, even though nothing has been settled around human sexuality, have decided to remain United Methodist. So to me, this actually gives me hope. This gives me excitement that while adjustments need to be made, and our denomination is going to look a lot more nimble moving forward, I'm grateful to see that the vast majority of churches decided to stay a part of the United Methodist Church. So if you can go to the next slide. Coming before General Conference, there's really, of those 1,000+ pieces of legislation, there are 3 major issues that are coming before us that could have an impact on us. The one is regionalization, which I'm going to talk about in more detail. The other is what's called our social principles. So in our Book of Discipline, there are these statements of kind of social things around economics, and a statement on abortion, a statement on civic service, war. Those are all a part of what's called our social principles. It's kind of the United Methodist statement on X social issue. And we have a statement around marriage and human sexuality that since 1978 has been debated and has caused some tension within our system. Currently, our social principles say that marriage is a sacred lifelong covenant between a man and a woman. I anticipate that at General Conference, there'll be momentum to change men and women to 2 persons. Now, the U.S. church may be there, but we have delegates from outside the United States who might not be. So what may happen is that there'll be a kind of a compromise statement that says we're not of one mind when it comes to marriage. Or it could maintain what we currently have. But that will come before General Conference, as it comes before every General Conference since 1978. But there might be, now that some of the numbers have shifted, there might be a threshold in which we can basically say, we don't agree. We don't see marriage the same way. And what's actually adds a unique part of this is there was a gathering, I shared with you about a gathering of delegates in Tanzania. I wrote about it in my e-news, and we're supporting building a roof on a church. Even the African delegates, and I say Africa as if it's a monolithic place. It's not. It's extremely diverse. But broadly speaking, even the African delegates aren't on one mind around this statement, lifelong covenant between a man and a woman, not because they support same-sex marriage, but we have many United Methodist pastors in places across the world that live in polyamorous relationships, polygamy, because culturally, tribally in many places, that is a cultural practice. And so they're coming at this from a completely different perspective to say that doesn't quite fit our culture and in our context. And so it makes these conversations really interesting as we look at it from the lens points of different cultures and different communities. There will also be energy and legislation that's already been submitted to remove what we call the prohibitive languages around LGBTQ marriage and ordination. Now, I don't know if there's enough of a threshold for that to pass at this General Conference. What may allow this to happen specifically in the United States is on regionalization, which is what I want to talk about now. So if you can go to the next slide. This is where things get a little complicated, but I think it's important for us to think through it. United Methodist Church, when it was established as a U.S. church. And then missionaries were sent all over the world and established other annual conferences. Methodism grew very quickly outside the United States. So when other annual conferences were formed, instead of calling them an annual conference, they called them central conferences. So any conference outside the United States is called a central conference. Because the United Methodist Church recognized that the context outside the United States was very different than inside the United States, in establishing central conferences outside the U.S., they gave them, general conferences gave them a lot of flexibility on adapting the Book of Discipline that meets their context. So outside the United States, you can change portions of the Book of Discipline without coming to General Conference, the global gathering of the church, if it's based on a contextual issue. Some of that is real simplistic, like if you've ever read the Book of Discipline, the language is U.S.-centric. It's set up like the U.S. legal system. Well, that doesn't work in other countries because they don't have the same legal system set up. So there's adaptations in the Book of Discipline around language of laws. There's adaptations in the Book of Discipline on credentialing of clergy. In the United States, to be ordained, you have to have a Master's of Divinity degree. In other places in the world, you don't have to have a Master's of Divinity degree. That's because those areas were able to adapt the Book of Discipline. The United States is not allowed to adapt our Book of Discipline. Even though outside the United States they are, only at General Conference are we able to adapt the Book of Discipline. So this is what General Conference typically looks like. Delegates from outside the United States have to thumb through thousands of pieces of legislation where the vast majority of the pieces of legislation are U.S. specific. So for example, our pension system as clergy gets voted on at General Conference. The pension system of U.S. pastors is very different than the pension system of places outside the United States. So delegates have to come to the United States and vote on things that do not impact them at all. It's a bizarre system, but that's how it's been set up. So what regionalization will do is it will allow the U.S. church to become a region, and it'll rename central conferences to regional conferences. So there will be equity across the system, that now every area of the world can have contextualization in adapting the Book of Discipline. So that way, when delegates come for a global gathering, we as a U.S. church can take care of all the U.S. particular things by ourselves and not have to have delegates from outside the United States vote on that. It gets real complicated, but that's kind of the broad thing, is we want to create more flexibility for the U.S. church to adapt to the Book of Discipline. So the U.S. church could decide what are our clergy requirements. What are we going to make our clergy do to be ordained? Right now, we can't do that. It is set by General Conference, but we could have some flexibility in that. What is not allowed to change in the Book of Discipline, the Book of Discipline has 7 sections to it. What's not allowed to change are the first 5 sections. Central Conference can't change that. We can't change that. Those are around our theological distinctives, our language of the atonement of Christ, our language around the Trinity. Our doctrinal things cannot change. Those are set in stone. They're not going anywhere. But particular things that are unique to the United States or unique to the Philippines or unique to Europe would be able to be adapted and changed. Now, this regionalization is actually widely supported by delegates outside the United States. It actually came from delegates outside the United States because they were getting tired of showing up and spending 2 weeks of their lives dealing primarily with U.S. central issues. If the United Methodist Church allows regionalization to happen and the U.S. becomes its own regional conference, it'll take about 2 years to restructure and live into that. There could be potential then to adapt some requirements on LGBTQ ordination and marriage. It could happen before that. It could happen at this general conference. I don't know that it will, but it could happen in the regionalization of the United States, because the United States is very different than it is outside the United States. But I can't read the tea leaves enough to know whether that's going to happen. But there is potential for that. Now, with that said, that is not the reason regionalization is happening. It is not being fueled by LGBTQ inclusion. I think some people are approaching it from that. It's really being fueled to create equity of contextualization. It's a recognition that United Methodists look differently, speak differently, worship differently. That's part of the issue too. Like, we have worship standards that are very white, middle-class American worship standards that do not translate to cultures and contexts outside the United States. So it would create a lot more equity, a lot more freedom for regions to adapt certain, certain practices. Doesn't change any of our doctrine, any of our theological distinctives, but would give a lot more flexibility. The last, the last thing I wanted to share, if you can go to the next slide, just this does directly impact us. That will happen sooner rather than later. On Tuesday, I had to participate in an online special jurisdictional conference. So jurisdictions are multiple states, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and the Dakotas make up the North Central jurisdiction. That is where we elect our bishops. They're elected there and they are appointed. So they serve within that region. They move around just like pastors can move around. At this jurisdictional conference on Tuesday, we voted our bishop is retiring this year, Bishop Palmer, and we voted to make East and West Ohio one Episcopal area. We're still two separate annual conferences. We'll still be West Ohio, East Ohio, but we'll have one bishop over all of Ohio instead of having two. East Ohio has a bishop, West Ohio has a bishop. That will happen in September. We won't know who our bishop is until July. In July, we have a jurisdictional conference in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We'll go there, and that's where bishops are moved around. So we'll find out. Most likely, I'm hopeful that our bishop will be the bishop of, East Ohio, who is Tracy Malone. She's a phenomenal bishop. I could see her being appointed to serve both East and West Ohio, but we will get a new bishop, and that bishop will be over both East and West Ohio. All right, so that was a lot thrown at you, but I wanted you to see not only where we're going, we'll get to this slide in a minute, but I wanted not only where we're going as a church and what's going well in our church and where we believe God's going, but just even kind of to lay out some of the denominational things. So what questions, comments, concerns do you have? If you just want to shout out, and then I'll try to repeat the question and answer it. Well done, Pastor. Thanks. What questions do you have, either on Cider Ridge or on denominational things? Nothing? All right, thanks, Neil. Yeah.
So I was under the impression that the schism had to do with the human sexuality question.
Yeah.
And it had been decided in some religion because of a decision. So obviously you just explained that that's not the case. Was there some moment where it made sense to allow people to leave? And why were they leaving? Because it was being discussed? Yeah. After the decision is made, is there likely to be another exodus?
Yeah. So the question is, great question, Neil. So the question is, in the split, the schism, was it over human sexuality? And if not, what was it over? And now that we're kind of past that disaffiliation thing, is there going to be another exodus of churches if anything changes? Does that kind of sum it up? So yes, the issue was over human sexuality, except what happened in 2019 at that special general conference was the Book of Discipline got more strict. So there has always, since 1978, been prohibitive language. But more conservative members of our church passed what was called the traditional plan. If you remember, we had a kind of a town hall gathering where we discussed this as well. The traditional plan not only said it maintained the current position, but it put even increased teeth on it, where it created more penalties for pastors who perform same-sex marriages, annual conferences that ordained LGBTQ clergy, and churches could be penalized for hosting same-sex marriages. So there was a swift response to that, to say it's too mean. Like, we can say we disagree, but this is really, really, really mean. At the very tail end of that general conference, more conservative members of the church began to see, now this is my opinion, wait, this is going to blow up in our face. And part of the issue was, in order to enact those penalties, a bishop had to do it. And there were a lot of bishops who said, we're not going to beat people up over this. We're tired of fighting about it. We're not going to kick pastors out. So some of the conservative members kind of saw the writing on the wall. So they said, we're tired of fighting about this too. Let's pass in General Conference a paragraph that gives us an exit. And so that was the paragraph 2553 that created a pathway for the vast majority were conservative churches to leave. And so that's where that disaffiliation statistics come from. Now, it specifically said, that paragraph, it had to be on a difference of human sexuality. Many of the churches that left, or a good number of the churches left, used other reasons. They don't like bishops. Many of them became non-denominational independent churches. They don't like the appointive system where pastors are itinerant. We get moved around by a bishop. They wanted to keep their own pastor. So the reasons kind of expanded, and so churches left for a lot of different reasons. They wanted to own their buildings compared to it being held in trust with the annual conference. So could more churches leave if the United Methodist Church creates more space for LGBTQ clergy in marriage? Yeah, there are means by which they can leave. It's just not as easy, and it's more costly now that part of the book of discipline has expired. But it could still happen. And that could come before General Conference of an additional pathway. There is some momentum to have some extending that paragraph. I don't think now that the numbers have shifted, because delegates who were conservative, that they were elected to be delegates, once their church voted to leave and they decided to leave the denomination, they're no longer eligible to serve as a delegate. So the delegate numbers in the U.S. have shifted a little bit more centrist progressive compared to what they used to be. What other questions? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to stick around. I'm around. Todd's around to answer some of these. And I wanted to end with this this prayer. Anthony, if you can go to the last slide. Maybe. Anthony, are you awake? Oh, you're good. Well, you're good. I'll just read it. It comes from Ephesians chapter 3, verses 20 through 21. This is Paul's words. I find great solace in these words because it talks about with God all things are possible. We don't know what's going to happen in our denomination, but I trust that God is still with us. One of my favorite lines from John Wesley as he's dying, literally the last words that are recorded of him as he's laying on his deathbed is, "Best of all, God is still with us." And so I love that sentiment that no matter what we face, and I recognize even here at Cider Ridge, we have differences. We've lost people over differences of perspective, particularly around human sexuality. They disagree with Pastor Todd and I's perspective, and they've chosen to leave. And some have stayed and are still trying to navigate how they feel on particular topics. But I still trust that with God, all things are able. And so Paul says these words, "Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we can ask." And we've laid out a budget to say this is God what we're asking for, but we're trusting that God has even far more than what we have even asked for, that we can ask or imagine. To him, to this God, be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. Amen and amen. I'm around if you have questions. There are cookies and coffee and drinks and stuff in the cafe. Please do eat some of that. And so thank you for coming. Appreciate your time.